Evening and welcome to ADSN number 80. This is the Independent Musician's Guide to Production and Promotion. This week, Sunwarper has gone off on paternity leave, so we are joined by Fyter for this deep dive into alternative workflows. Hello, Fyter. You're right, mate. He'll be taking us through his new approach into making albums and how they sound cohesive, and how to be part of an entire unit as opposed to separate singles. Later in the show, we'll be discussing the advantages to mixing up your workflow, along with ways in which you can unlock a new level of creativity. This show is brought to you by our patrons, and each week we will go live with them before it heads to podcast platforms on Saturday. You can head to patreon.com/audionautic to join us and share your opinions on the stream, as well as additional bonus content and hangouts. Now, you're used to Sunwarper's voice at the beginning of these shows, and as you know, he's off on paternity. So my name is Curtis, and I am joined by Fyter. But first, before we get into that, Eon Lake, my co-host here. How are you doing, sir?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. Nice to be here. Obviously, we're missing the big guy, but you know, he's on that baby holiday thing, isn't it?
Yeah, he is. He's on that baby holiday, and he'll be with us. He'll be off for a few weeks. We haven't decided, or he hasn't decided how long. So we have an array of guest hosts.
So obviously, congratulations to the Warpers on the little Warper, and Mrs. Warper did a great job there for the first one. So everything's good in their town, and we're here doing our thing as normal because the music never stops.
It doesn't. It's got to keep going. Have you had a good week, bro? What have you been doing?
What have I been doing? I've been tackling that work-life balance thing and trying to get some actual music done in and around all the other stuff that's been going on. It's a little tricky at the moment, and I'm doing things in stages, and I'm back in a situation where things are left here and switched on longer than they should be because I haven't finished a mix or something. But I've been mainly trying to finish things off and not really getting very far.
Okay. All right.
So nearly there now. So close. Got a couple of tracks I'm trying to finish. Then I'm back onto the EP that I've been working on for way too long already. But yeah, I mean, yeah, we complain about not necessarily having enough time, but I think just being able to do this is its own reward. I need to keep reminding myself of that. And the fact I'd have had an egg when I was a kid if I'd known I'd be doing this with this gear and stuff. It's great fun.
Yeah, it is. We have to be very grateful. I think practicing gratitude is half the game, isn't it, at the end of the day?
It helps, for sure.
We're in a very privileged position, but if we can do this both on our own as well as the community in which we live. And, we've got to remain grateful. Speaking of the community, as I keep saying, Fyter is joining us this week, filling in for Sunwarper, who's off on maternity. Fyter, Steve, thank you ever so much for joining us. How you doing, man?
Thanks for having me, and congrats to, I like how Eon said it, congrats to the Warpers. I think that's a cool way to say it. I'm doing well, and just some advice for Eon. If he can't finish those songs, just do a fade out. Right?
I've actually done that for the first time. I don't think I've ever faded a song. I love differential fades where things fade out at different times. But I think on my next album, I think it's the first time I've ever faded a track out.
Wow. I was guilty of doing that too much back in the day, and I called myself out on it. And a friend of mine said, well, every song in the Steely Dan's Asia album fades out. So, I mean, it's a phenomenal album. And so there you go.
The psychological beauty of that is you never hear the song finish, so it can like stay in your head.
Right. And then you got to go see them live so that you can actually see how it finishes.
Well, yeah.
I'm good. I've had a very productive week. Been seeing Shady a lot lately. He's going to be featured on one of the DJST shows that came from Enclosures in a couple of weeks. So I've been prepping for that a little bit. We've been working on the masters for our upcoming album. Went out and took some pics recently. I've been doing some video editing. So surprisingly very busy with some nice weather outside and still getting outside. So I don't know what I'm doing this week, if it's too much Red Bull or what, but productive one way or the other.
So you're mastering already.
Yeah, we're mastering, but it's going to still be a while before it's released. We still got to figure out how we want to package everything up and So
Shady's always done a good job at like making that whole cohesive unit thing, and I think it's the idea. As soon as we finish the work, we want to get it out as quick as possible. But taking the time, like you say, taking the photos, doing the video editing, getting the promotion done first, so it's all like there and scheduled. That's a good way of doing it.
The music, I think, is pretty much done. It's just the packaging part that we need to put some effort. I mean, he's really good at that. That's his kind of his spiel. I'm more on the audio side of things. So he's got some really good ideas. I'm super excited about this, but I'll be super excited for a few months before we see that.
So you do some of the video edits then?
I've done, well, secrets being pushed out here, but I've been videoing myself with the key step and the beat step and the APC. So I'm gonna start pushing some of that stuff out, and you'll see here soon.
Has it been a good process for you? Has it been one that you've been excited by?
Yeah, everything's went pretty smooth. The only tough part is I need more memory on my computer because the videos, they soak up a lot of memory.
Mm-hmm.
So
do you have any external hard drive?
Yeah, I've got an external hard drive, and that's probably where I'll start stashing these things.
That goes. What are you going to say, Ian? Like, sorry, I cut across you.
So you're trying to do it all on one machine, like producing music and video in it and recording the video all at one time, or
all in one shot? It's a performance video, more or less.
I'll be looking forward to that.
Yes, I mean, obviously the first time I've really been doing this, so it's going to be a little rough around the edges, but that's great because then it gives me room to progress.
The best things are a little bit rough around the edges. Like you say, it gives you space to regress. And I think doing something you learn something in the process of doing that. And so it doesn't matter, you know. It's always good to see. That's what
if you want to get good at it, do it a lot.
We are joined in the chat. I've got so many tabs open because I'm doing this all on my own today. We have got Abby in the chat, which is very much so here. So thank you, very good, Abby. Yes, I'm well. Thank you very much. Sorry, I didn't reply to you. Like I say, lots going on right now. And we have Shady, the ever faithful Shady, who is here for the co-host debut, which is wonderful in that own regard. Thank you ever so much for joining us today, guys. Wonderful to see everyone here. It's not the first time you've been on the show, though, is it, Fyter?
Well, I've been on the show a ton of times in the round robin, but there was one time where you were actually, I think you were in Norway or Sweden, Curtis, on a trip a year or two ago, and Sunwarper asked me to jump on and co-host here too. So hopefully my speech is a little better this time around than it was the last time around, but we'll find out.
We'll find out. We'll find out. It sounded good and beautiful over here. So as ever, for everyone listening at home and back on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, we are having a look at workflow this week. A few weeks ago, Fyter teased the notion of having a different workflow, or an alternative workflow, one that I ended up calling I remember you saying it, and I think I've run with it, the idea of a horizontal workflow. Slightly different, and we're going to get into that. But yes, that is the theme of today. We're going to be looking at how, firstly, Fyter is doing and working with his templates, and then we're going to be discussing alternative workflows, because we've talked about it before in certain different aspects, but never unified it. Eon Lake is a big fan of a whiteboard, for example. More about that later. Right, that was very radio, actually, to be fair. But let's get straight into it. So, Fyter, I contacted you a few weeks ago. What are we discussing on your end here?
Well, I've got a template I have set up in Ableton, so I guess I want to present that. And this is new to me over the past year or so. So shall I share?
Please.
Let me try this.
In background, you are a template guy anyway, but in between projects, you kind of have a think about how you're going to do things next time, and you kind of set up for each major project, don't you?
Yeah, well, I think in the past what I've done is I do use kind of a template, but this is a way larger, much more expanded version of it. So let's see if I can share my screen.
So if you bring this up, while we come through it, so what's the context surrounding this? So what would you say would be the clinical difference between this template and, say, this process and processes that you've done before? You say it's a lot bigger. It's a lot bigger. What's the main key difference we're talking about?
I really built out multiple instruments since in various aspects of pads and leads and basses and stuff like that, where I can pick and choose what I want to do. Whereas before I would develop it with the song as I'm writing it. So I'm having a little bit of trouble sharing here.
Present, share screen. Then you get
So yeah,
pop
go
up.
for it.
Just present, share screen, share screen. I think I want to do it. It's asking for my browser. Oh no, never mind. I gotta go to a window.
If you go to entire screen or window,
I'll go
that's
to
the way
entire screen. Yep. All right, so you're gonna see each other here.
Oh, are we? I can't see it right now. If you bring it up before you come in, Ace of Stripes just joined the chat. Hello, Ace of Stripes. Love to see you. Who's also going to be co-hosting in the next few weeks' time. Yeah, if you hit present and then share screen, it will pop up and then it pops through.
Yep, and I'm doing the entire screen. Okay. You're gonna see yourselves here, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see it?
No, not quite now.
Oh dear, man! I should have probably practiced this beforehand.
If you, there is also the idea of in the middle you've got Chrome tab, you've got window, and you've got entire screen.
Yeah, I'm doing the entire screen.
Okay.
Chrome has lost permission to capture your screen. To fix it, go to System Preferences.
You're on Mac, aren't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
You need to allow the app permission to share your screen, and then it will work.
While we can run through that, running through the permissions, Eon Lake, what is there any particular workflow in which you yourself have kind of switched recently at all?
I'm still trying to do things in as varied a way as possible, so I'm not doing some things the same way. What's changed for me a little bit on recent stuff is I want it's more of a sound design to kick the whole thing off, to provide some sort of atmosphere or a vibe or something that gets the rest of it going. I'm not starting with drums or anything. It's treating a lot of things, doing some experiments, and when I hear something I like, then maybe that's the beginning of a song. I have gone kind of in the opposite direction to Fyter, I think, really, from having a template that has all of my hardware already in it, ready to play, coming into the door, and my favorite software stuff as well, so that I can just pick and choose. I've gone to just bringing in the original idea and then just adding a few things around it and being a bit more trying to evolve the sounds and being a bit more selective about what I throw in. What I found, because we are going to be talking about horizontal versus vertical, when I've got a template with everything in, I tend to throw everything in. And we end up with like a relatively short piece of music that's got 50 parts in it or something stupid, whereas I think developing a single idea on a single instrument or whatever for a longer period and having more than one section and so on before I start doing anything else kind of works a bit better for me creatively. I don't get stuck in a rut so much.
So I have to quit Chrome and reopen it. So I'm gonna probably drop here, guys, but I'll be back in shortly. Is that cool?
Cool?
Yeah,
totally. Looking forward to that. See you in a sec, bro. So
less orderly, a little bit more random and off the cuff recently. But I think once I've finished this album, the EP has been done more on my laptop, away from the studio, with a couple of things plugged into it from time to time. There's certain ideas that I'm exploring on that don't necessarily need the whole studio to get started on. So a lot more of that's happened on the laptop, and I think it sounds a little bit different as a result. I am going to do a bit of I know you do this as well, actually, have a big chin rub before the next major project, though, and think about what I want to do differently, how the sounds might be different, what I haven't done before. any influences that I have that I've not really explored, because there are a few, I think. Yeah, I've got, you mentioned the whiteboard earlier. I've got a list of things on there, of things that I want to include in the next iteration of whatever I decide to do. And one of them is, I don't know if you've heard of Stars of the Lid. And one of them
I can't say.
died recently. He was very influential in post-rock and ambient stuff. And one of the first people I heard who used sort of distortion as a texture in ambient stuff. And it's kind of made me want to explore that as well, because of all the harmonics, especially if you've got like an overdriven rather than distorted sound, bringing out the harmonics in things for the purposes of drones and so on. I don't know. There are things I want to explore there. So that's kind of like an idea of something that I want to fold in. But yeah, I will stop and rub the old chin and think, what do I do next before I actually do it?
I get that. I'm going to have a look at that myself. Again, recently just moving to the idea that distortion overdrive can be used very nicely on ambient and kind of more chilled out tunes. So it'd be good to see. If those have just joined us, we are with Hydrofighter. I'm going to bring it back in, and we are looking at alternative workflows. Hydrofighter is about to share his horizontal workflow with us today. What are your what are your alternative workflows? How do you work? And we'd be curious to know in the community, how do you shake things up? How are you keeping things fresh in terms of workflow in the studio? That's what we want to know. Welcome back, Hydrofighter. How you doing, man?
Thank you. We're gonna find out how I'm doing. So while I'm sharing my screen here, I did get a chance to see Stars of the Lid one time, and I never saw an ambient act with such massive bass before.
Really? Oh man, I'm jealous.
Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, I can share that, and I can put this on. So this is Hydrofighter is about to share his workflow in his Ableton. This looks beautiful. I'm going to share this so everyone can see it. This is, look at this. If I make this full screen, look at that beautiful thing. What we looking at, Steve?
It's very organized.
Well, kind of. I mean, all the clips are all over the place because what I'm doing here is I'm not writing the song necessarily here. What I've done is I've designed a bunch of different instruments, a bunch of different drums. So up here, what I have here is 4 drum tracks. These, and you guys know how I do my drums. I do a lot of sampling. So this is usually where I've started with these things. So one of the reasons I wanted to put all of this into a template is then I can create a drum loop, and I can build the consistency between drum track to drum track to drum track instead of fighting it in 2 different songs or two different Ableton sessions. So that's one of the things. And then you'll see I only got 1 bass track here, but what I do have is I've got a group of different basses. Really, one reason why I wanted to build out this template is I wanted to dive deeper into the Arturia suite that I have. So you can see that I've got the Jupiter, the Juno, the Prophet. Oddity is outside of the Arturia realm. I think that's a G-Force thing, but I've got some other things in here too. So I can pick one of these. I can mix and match how I want to do it. And I did the same thing with pads. So
this means they're all running at the same time, right? So that you can crossfade.
You can, if you want, and I'll tell you, if you have them all running at the same time, it's going to put a load on your PCU.
Yeah.
So what I've been doing is turning off specific instruments if I know I'm not using them. So I've done that same thing with pads. Now leads I've broken out separately, because with leads I tend to play with the actual synth and more of the effects in real time. So you can see here with this lead, I've got the attack, the decay, sustain, certain things that I know I'm going to use that will sync up with the APC40 with my MIDI controller, so I can actually dial those things in how I want. So I've done that for all of these other different things here. And then I haven't really built up much with melody yet on these things, but I've also got samples of like some city sounds, some forests, some waves. Those things are all in a sampler. And then I've got some voice samples too that I've basically packaged up all into these groups. So the idea of what I'm doing here is I'm not going to use every single track here. I'm going to pick and choose which tracks I want to work together with. And I can either start that from this template and delete out the tracks I'm not using, or else, I don't know if you guys know this in Ableton, but you can always go to your folders of where your songs are at. You can expand out your template here, and you can drag and drop. So if I might be starting fresh on a new song, I mean, you can drag and drop these specific instruments in there.
Yeah, I do that sometimes when I write a part and it just doesn't fit, but I really like it. So I just drag it into a new arrangement and deal with it there.
The other thing I like about building a template is now I know I've got everything mapped out to the macros. So if I start a new song, I add a synth from my plugins up here, and I have to start all over and start basically remapping everything and play with each thing. Having these macros built out allows me to dial in more easily. So really, when I get to the songwriting point of my process, I'm ready to play around with these things, and I don't have to open up screens, change settings there. I want it to be a plug and play type of thing.
Well, that's exactly what Asaph Stripe's saying in the comments. He's saying it's like it's a sketch pad and play kind of thing. So you're not so much focused on, you've already got the sounds, you've got everything you're already happy with, and now it's just a case of being creative and fun.
Yeah. To pick out now, I'm in the process of, I've got 2 songs that I'm working on at the moment. So, I mean, going through picking out the specific drum tracks I want to use for that, the specific bass sounds, the pads. That's pretty much it. I mean, everything, one of these clips in here is just kind of a generic clip to help me design the sound. But really, what
generic clip, is it blank?
No, I mean, there's patterns in here.
Okay,
but it's not what I'm going to use ultimately on the final song. I just want to use the idea of what it is and then go back and rewrite it the way that I want to write it.
Right. So is that like just a groove or something?
Yeah.
To get things rolling.
Yep.
I like the idea of starting with something and then building all the things on top of that and then going back and starting to replace so that your end result is only sort of distantly related to what you started with. And I like every part in it to have been influenced by the other parts, if you see what I mean. And the first one can't be, because it's the first one. So I like the idea of going back and sort of replacing stuff once it starts to live a bit.
Yeah, I think it's going to work. I think I can get 2 or 3 releases out of this thing before I start evolving. I mean, it's always going to evolve. I suspect that I'm going to take these pads and do the same thing like what I did with the leads, and just start building out what I want to play with on the pads in real time versus just having a pad be what it is throughout the whole song.
Yeah. So a couple of questions on this. Is the idea, once you've set all this up, is it like setting up that it's that whole sort of studio as an instrument sort of thing? So you get this set up so that you can maybe put it to one side. Do you have enough control from your MIDI controllers and so on to be able to play any of this and adapt it and flex it from there, so that you can sort of put the screen to one side a bit and sort of just vibe? Or is that not necessarily where you were going?
So what I've always done, because the APC is it has 8 channels that you can touch at any given point. You can toggle over, you can slide over more. I don't like doing that. So I'll bring a song down to at least 8 tracks. Probably no more than that. Some songs that are more simple. What's that?
Are you using just groups for that?
Yeah, I guess.
So it's an instrument rack. Essentially, you're layering your pads, for example, into one track.
That's essentially what this is here, like the bass. I mean, if I only wanted to use one thing, but because of the macros, I can drop everything down here. So yeah, and the other thing I didn't mention earlier is I work from a MacBook Pro, so it's a laptop, and really what I like to do is I like to lay on the couch sometimes throw the MacBook on my belly and do the sound design part. But when it comes to writing, I want to plug in the hardware and use keyboards and sequencers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So the beat step will be set up to trigger whatever I got here. So with my drum stuff, I usually have multiple different sounds for kicks, and I usually do kicks and bottoms, snares, hats, and then some sort of either loops or other additional percussion. And then I've got effects in there for that. So I've got all of my effects built out for all of these different instruments too. So I've got bass effects. I've got pad effects. I've got my Supermassive here. I got some other delays. Yeah, same thing. I've got delays here. I mean, you can never go wrong with Supermassive. So a lot of my effects on all of these different instruments are similar. And that way it keeps it consistent. So when I do go to write or perform it, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I don't have to come up with something new and have to learn it all over again or something like that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I
For
like
sure.
that idea. I like the whole bringing it together so that it all makes sense, doing the legwork so that afterwards you can just be creative.
Yeah.
When this was first brought to my attention back a couple of weeks ago on ADSN a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned how you were using this to create a consistent sound through for an album as opposed to separate singles. Am I correct in that, or am I misinterpreting?
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, especially with the drums, because I mean the other instruments, especially the leads, I'll change those sounds, but the drums I want to be consistent from song to song to song. So I've basically got them set up to have similar volumes and similar. It's really about getting the levels consistent with the drums, and then I build everything else around the drums. So usually it'll be, in terms of sound design, I start with drums and then I go to bass and then either pads or leads or whatever. But when it gets to writing, now I'll create a drum pattern. And I'll probably write on a keyboard the harmonic structure. So that'll probably come with the pads, and the bass will follow into that. And then I'll figure out what to do with the leads. So it's a pretty standard process for myself. It's pretty consistent, I should say.
And has it achieved? Is it when you come to write? Are you writing individual songs, or are you writing? And now, are you doing all the drums at once, or the bass at once, but you're splitting through?
Yeah. It's writing one song at a time. But I shouldn't say one song at a time, because I'm actually writing two songs at a time right now. And I guess one thing I didn't say a couple weeks ago is I've always kind of thought about songs in an album having sisters. So one song on one side of the album could have something very similar on the other side of the album. If you have them back to back, it's kind of redundant. So I like to break up that songwriting process where you have the variety on other sides. As long as they're spaced out enough, it doesn't have that redundancy. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I like the idea of a theme returning in a different form later on in the album.
Yeah, so I'll do a couple songs here that will be two similar drum style songs, and then I'll do two similar ambient style songs.
Right, and then change things up a bit, or
just
use anyway.
If I feel like the need. And even when you bring all of these tracks into a new song, I mean, you're going to have to tweak them to adjust to the sound of the song that you want. But I mean, it's just really staging it more than anything else.
Okay, so one of the benefits I see in this, obviously, you've got a lot of macros and a lot of control grouped and so on, and that gives you the opportunity to record it and so on. Do you do much of that, or is it just so that you've got hands-on control, or both?
I will do all hands-on control. I think I'll probably create some loops with the harmonic structures and the drums. My intention for most of this stuff is to probably do the APC with the beat step simultaneous, or the APC with the key step. I don't think I'll have all three of them going at the same time. But when I mix my songs, and I've done this with Shady's stuff or the Thief stuff too, is a lot of times I'll do it all on the APC. I'm not doing any drawing of automations and any stuff like that.
No, I was wondering if you were just recording live automation and sound evolution that you're doing physically.
Absolutely. So especially with these leads, setting up these decays and sustains and releases and the filters, that's all coming directly from the controller. I do not draw out any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Do you ever find, as you said, you mentioned how you kind of limit yourself to 8 tracks because there's 9 tracks on the APC and there's 8 channels and 1 master. Am I correct there?
Yep.
Yeah. So do you ever find yourself breaking the rules? Like, for example, I have 2 launch controls, and that gives me 16 channels. And I said to myself, I'm going to stick with that, and I'm not going to do any more. And
I know what's coming.
Like, I as far as when I'm composing, I relatively most of the time I stick to those 16 channels and I leave it at that. But when it comes to the production, all that shit goes out the door, and it just becomes mental. And I can't stop myself. Maybe I need better discipline. Maybe that is. But I keep my point. My point is I am breaking my own rules at that point. Do you find yourself doing the same thing, or are you more disciplined than me?
I am probably now more disciplined, but 2 or 3 years ago, I broke that rule, and that basically told me I'm never doing that again because it got too complex and my couldn't keep my thoughts straight. And actually, I'm trying to bring it down even with less than the 8 tracks because I'm right now I'm also trying to undo some bad habits. And by doing that, I want to start smaller and then expand back out.
Okay. So, confess. What are your bad habits? You're trying to address here.
Over compression. I mean, compression is probably my biggest bad habit. Textures, having too much texture on there changes how your compression works. Panning and delays are other things I need to kind of rework. Where do things need to fall in the stereo field to create a maybe a cleaner mix? I don't know if I necessarily am going for a cleaner mix. I just want it to be a lot more consistent.
I get that.
Because you bring the noise floor up. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Leon. Show your question. All good, man.
As you were just saying, because you could compress it a lot and you bring the noise floor up, does it mean you have too much texture there and too much?
Yeah, I think when the balance between having thinner textures and songs evolving into thicker textures, that if I got too much compression on there, you can hear the change too much, and it just feels like the compression is soaking parts out of the song.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I have another couple of questions. Just wanted to say hi to those who have been joining while you've been demonstrating Hydrofighter. But Bendu has joined us in the chat. Hello, Bendu. Lovely to see you. We also have FCC. He's joined us to say hello, which is always nice to see. Trying to get FCC on the show in the next couple of weeks to help with Operation Paternity. But I'll have to see how that goes. And Aether Stripe, David says he's actually trying automation for the first time now. No drawing. Just turning knobs like I would live, which is, again, Hydrofighter. That's kind of what you've done with the APC.
That's exactly what I'm doing.
I like to think of it as a band of me and recording everything that I would do in a song, but I can't. I don't have 12 arms, so I have to do it in a few goes and record it.
You might have to go swimming in that toxic lake and see if you can grow some additional appendages.
Keep it organic.
Is there anything else you want to see here, Curtis or Ian?
I'm fascinated as to in switching up to this workflow. If there's been, obviously we have set ways in which we work, and again, this episode is about exploring different workflows in ways in which we can create something new. And you've been very vocal about what you've managed to create and what you've managed to create and how it's kind of working for you. Have there been any drawbacks?
No, the only thing that's trouble with this is when you load this song, because there's so much in it. It takes a while for it to load. So I don't think if I expand my pads out and start building in the parameters from the actual synth, there's no way I'm going to be able to load that much stuff, I think. So I think what I may do is end up just having multiple different templates where I might just have a template of all leads and then a template of all pads and then a template of all basses and drums and whatever, and then just drag and drop the tracks in like what we discussed earlier. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Are you ever blending your multiple VSTs together? I know that you're using the Arturia suite, and they, as far as I'm aware, they're pretty CPU heavy. But are you
Yeah.
are you using your rack to blend different sounds together as well? So within that one track of pads, you maybe have 3 or 4 different
Yeah, I will probably do that some, not all of the time. And definitely with the leads too, I'll have the same pattern triggering 2 different leads, and that way when you're playing with the parameters of the synth, it just comes out super cool. And I might have one lead more up the middle on the stereo field, and I might have one delayed out a little bit different. I should think about panning left and right a little bit more with those to see what kind of effect I get with that too. But
okay, there, it's all in there.
yeah.
I'm going thick and fast. Sorry, like I'm going thick and fast.
know
Like,
you
this
carry on.
keeps triggering my notions. So when you're so we're talking about when you're recording it, and you're saying that all your automation you're kind of doing on the fly with your APC as you go. Are you then going back and producing, or is that it at that point? Is the song done?
Ideally, it's done, but if there's something that's off, I'll adjust it. And a lot of the times, you'll see here too, most of my volumes are pegged at the top, and I adjust it using the utilities. That's so when I'm on the APC, I can just throw it all the way up without having to worry about going over nominal.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That's yeah, for sure. I do the same thing with the utility. It's especially when you get into the nuts and bolts and the intricacies of automating through volume knobs, or through, again, in my case it'd be the launch control. It can be an absolute nightmare to change the automation. So slapping a utility on the end of the chain and just maneuvering that, if it has to go up or down a decibel or two, that's wonderful. That is.
Do either of you find that messes with your gain staging at all? Because you don't want to run too hot through plugins and stuff like that. You tend to get some.
That's probably something I should add to my list of bad habits to fix.
Well, I mean, it might just mean put the utility earlier in the chain. I don't know, or have one either end.
There's times I've had 3 or 4 utilities on a track scattered all over the place.
Yeah. I feel I mean, if you guys, I'm pretty sure, Ian, like if you had a look at my effects chain for some of my finished songs, you go, what the fuck? It's chaos.
I like to think of that as being particularly creative, though. I mean, having but what I'm trying to do now is to do that more, really heavily affect stuff and print it, so that I've got some sounds that I've used that I don't even know how I made them anymore. And I kind of like the fact it's even a mystery to me.
I like that. If it's a mystery to you, it's the way forward. Which brings an interesting one. Bendu's just popped up and said, for a live set with the APC, I changed the way the fader is mapped. So slamming the fader to the top hits 0 decibels and it won't go further.
Yep.
Yeah, because you can set ranges, can't you, on all of these things, so that your controller range goes from -75 to 0. So even if you go above it, it doesn't go above it, if you see what I mean.
Oh, so is he saying that he's doing that on the hardware?
He's doing it on his APC, yeah.
Ah, I didn't even know I could do that. I tried not to play too much with the hardware. I like it out of the box as much as I can.
Get that?
But
yeah.
This is it. This is why we like to talk about these things. There's always another way to do it.
Well, as FCC says, everything feels like a mystery to me, and that's the thing. That's part of what these discussions are. It's demystifying the world in which we live in terms of music production, so that we can kind of learn from each other, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think these templates are a great idea, but I think an even better idea is experimenting with templates in general and figuring out what they give you in your particular workflow, and then ultimately what's the best approach for you. But you only really get that from using them to some degree, I think. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah. Hey, Curtis, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see your faces.
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
One last
and
question
do-
on that screen before it goes, though, is are you using the scenes there for various stages of the track, or
I might. It depends. I mean, because that also you're talking about triggering it from here.
well, yeah, or, I mean, is a row equivalent to anything, or is it literally what you choose to pick out of the whole grid and play?
I
using
think
BBC?
I think for the most part, once I tear it apart into individual songs, I'll probably just have one or two scenes. So it's not going to be as much using the scenes as much as it's going to be triggering the clips and bouncing texture like that.
So do you record it into arrangement view in the traditional manner then?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying not to even look at my computer screen when I'm doing that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's what we need.
Yeah.
Just to answer your previous question, Hydro Fighter, it's a setting in the live set file, apparently. I don't have an APC, so I don't really know what that means, but I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, Google it, right?
Yeah, make it work. Yeah. But yeah, thank you ever so much for sharing your workflow, Hydro Fighter. It's what we need. I mean, I want to talk a little bit more about tempo. Tempo is about templates, but tempo is a part of changing workflow, which I mean is a very what's the phrase? It's a very truncated but interesting segue. We're talking about workflows here. We're talking about workflows. The question is, why is it good to switch up our workflow? Why is it a good thing to experiment with different ways in which we create? I'm asking the room. I'm asking the people, everyone, the internet, everyone who wants to know anything. Why is that a good show?
I don't want to jump in too quick.
You want me to jump in, Ian? Or is
I
this
have opinions, but yeah.
Is
I was
this
trying
kind
to
of
be
a round
polite.
robin? Is this kind of a
no?
round robin?
I mean, kind of, this whole show is kind of like a round robin.
It has that element to it, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. There's no marketing this week. There's no real news. There was not any real decent news that I was going to put it through. And there's so much here to unpack. So I thought, fuck it, let's have an extended round robin. But yeah, we've been talking about workflow, and we will be sharing our ideas and ways in which we can switch workflow to make it work. But the question I really want to kind of hammer home from the very beginning for anyone new tuning in is, why is it good to switch up our workflow? Why is it good for us to try out different ideas of creation?
I think it helps you grow as a musician, for one. I mean, if you do the same thing over and over, you're not going to evolve and you're not going to get better. And I showed you one template I have today. When I was recording with Shady, working on the new Thieves stuff, I had a total different, smaller, simpler template, but I'm using different types of instruments and effects.
was it geared towards different goals, or was it just
yeah, absolutely
not having to do as much with it because there's a whole other half of the band?
Well, doing both, actually. I mean, different goals. I was using a lot of loopers on that stuff, and I'm not doing any loopers on what I just showed you there. So it's a different sound. It's he brings in a lot of guitar, which is cool. Different style of effects. I think you're different, but I mean, back to the original question, I think it's still, I mean, you got to evolve. And I mean, I'm showing you something that's in the box. I mean, I'm hoping within a few years that I'll be like Eon, where you're doing both in the box and out of the box, and have to think about a different style of template, right?
Yeah, completely. So, okay, so fresh ideas, fresh sounds, fresh kind of ways of working. Like, why do you feel it's good for you to switch up your workflow?
Couple of reasons. I think that the first one is there's a whole world of stuff here, and we've talked a lot about. There are a lot of different ways of doing the same thing, and that I think is a good thing because it helps to inspire you. I think doing everything the same way can end up being quite dogmatic ultimately if you just keep chipping away doing the same thing, and it can feel a little bit painting by numbers. It's all about exploration, how many different ways there are to do things and what you can learn from doing things different ways. It's about understanding the relationships between the different parts that go to make up your music. I think it helps to keep it interesting, both as somebody trying to write something and be creative, but also as somebody who's trying to capture something somebody's written, or it's the same person. I'm sounding a little bit schizo here, but and then, you know, from a production point of view, it gives you variety as well. And I think that's important, because especially when you start working on longer bodies of work, you want to do an album or something of that length. And I've been reading recently that average album lengths have been getting longer and longer recently. You don't want everything to sound the same. And if you do everything the same way and always take the same approach, there's going to be an undeniable similarity. And I think also when something becomes proceduralized too much, it can almost seem automatic and kind of phoned in. I don't know. I like to try and keep myself engaged in it actively, so it's not just, well, I do this because this is what I always do.
Yeah,
it's probably not great for the output to take that approach.
For sure. I think it's a very interesting thing. Like, I think the phrase that sticks out to me in that was the idea of paint by numbers. I think as soon as it becomes automated, like you say, you lose that novelty, you lose that spark. And if it's not challenging, I think some of the greatest sounds and some of the greatest, I mean, not that I make particularly great sounds or anything, but some of the things that stick closest to me are the ones where I've kind of gone out of the box completely, and I've gone, well, what happens if I link this LFO to this LFO, which is also linked to this LFO, which is then also linked to this, and it, you know, and just boom, before you know it, you've got a really weird, wacky sound, and it's fantastic. I think as soon as I've been doing these weekly live streams where I log on and I just kind of hit record and go to mix success. But the weeks in which I've felt really bad about what I've done coming out of it are the ones where I've kind of followed a similar pattern with the similar patches and the similar sounds and whatnot. And it's only those where something new and fresh is coming where I've gone, that's a song. That could be a song in a week or so.
If you've got a workflow that doesn't allow for happy accidents, you should stop now. and never do music again, because happy accidents are probably going to be the best thing you ever did. They certainly are for me.
Well, I mean, if you're stuck on one set of rules, you're restricting yourself from getting new gear too, right? Every time you add a new piece of gear, you got to switch it up.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, for sure.
Might save a few bucks if you do it that way, though.
Also true. Yeah,
can't put a price on creativity though, gents, can you? Can't do that to a degree anyway. Let's see what happens, what the debt collectors say. But FCC Frequency Control Center had a really good point here. Changing the box you work within changes the end result. Sometimes I don't start with my normal template with my favorite synths, etc., so I can have a blank starting point. That's a really good point. Just starting with a blank canvas in the name of Bob Ross and just kind of running with it. And then he also says starting with reel-to-reel loops is always a good baseline that makes things a bit more random. Random. That's a key point. I think randomity, what I mean.
I think generally,
yeah, randomness.
Great. I've been known to do that. I think we've talked about this in the past, where if you can't think of something, just literally set up a random instrument and record its output, you know, so you've got, you know, put 16th notes in with a probability on each to play, I don't know, 30, 40%, whatever, depending on how busy you want it to be. Set a scale, get the pitch to vary by a random amount, and just record it. And if you like, you know, you can take little snippets out of it that you like. This is not, the idea here is not to create music using random, you know, generators. It's just to kick the ball off and get started. When you hear something you like, then you just take that bang and start working with that, and you're off and doing something. So I've been known to do that when I'm stuck, nothing's really happening. I'll just let chance throw something in there. And I always, you know, change it, modify it, extend it, but it's just getting me started. Sometimes it's like having that ghost other half of the band that doesn't exist. See, Fyter, he's got someone else to bounce ideas off sometimes. Yeah. We don't have that. We're weird loner nomads, aren't we, when we're not collaborating?
You need to get a mirror. You need to get a mirror in your studio so you have somebody to talk to.
I've got the stuffed version of me. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, that's right. And Curtis, you got the cats, right?
Yeah, Steve and Tina. Literally the other day, I was doing some work and I had Tina on my lap and she was purring away, and I grabbed the microphone, and I just put
Yeah.
it through and just kind of had her purring. I was just kind of right. I just that's a kick, that's something. Then
What does
I made a drum
harmonizer sound like?
Yeah.
I want
exactly.
to pitch it down. I also want to pitch it up and keep the real one too.
Shit that well, again FCC says it, you have to roll the inspiration dice sometimes, and then and Bendu says limits to the source of inspiration. Unlimited possibility equals get nothing done, and he's totally right in that sense. The idea of combining those two, so you have that randomization, be it a step divider in Ableton, for example, which creates something, but then also you've got a limitation in which to work through. You no longer have that paralysis of analysis, which is a wonderful way of doing it. I would like us to get into the nuts and bolts of kind of our own ways to switch up our own workflow. Unless there's anything more to be said on why workflow is such an important thing to be said.
Yeah, I think it's just inspiration related. I think when I write, I'm trying to get into a flow state to do something where I'm just trying to keep up with the flow of ideas and get them recorded before it stops, because I love that. I really love that. What I don't want to do is to be just iterating a formula and getting a result in a sort of predefined logical way. I don't really want to make logical music. I like logical constructs as far as a jumping off point is concerned, but once I'm started, I just want to try and get in flow and make something to be sort of valued or changed or whatever later on. I don't really want to do anything procedural where I plan it and I do what I plan and then it comes out. I think for me, it would probably come out really static if I do that.
I think that's fair.
So avoiding that, basically.
So in the name of avoiding, sorry, Hadify, go ahead, man.
I was say you may as well do AI at that point.
Very much so. A lot of AI stuff is incredibly generic. Go onto a website, you'll see all the stuff made by AI, and it's all the same. It works, and people buy it, but it's void of soul. Anyway, in that notion of keeping things fresh, Eon Lake, you went on and told us all about how you don't like to be stuck within and churning out the idea of procedural creation. So what do you do? What's your number one way of keeping that workflow from being different? What do you do? What discipline have you created within yourself?
I seem to be quite hung up on the way in and the starting point, and I think for me that's one of the challenges, along with the finishing point. But we'll come to that later. The middle bit's the easy bit. It's starting differently and having different ideas. I see what I do as Eon Lake is it's all an exploration. It's all just seeing how much I can do, how different, I can do stuff. And it's all just exploring ideas. So I like to have an idea to start with, but then I like it to be more intuitive after that and stop thinking about it. Because the ideas never really, I don't come up with them when I'm in the studio. I'll come up with them when I'm not in the studio and make a note of them so that when I do come in here, I've got something to do and I don't just sit here going, what should I do then? I've got some ideas. I keep looking at the whiteboard. I can't help it to see, and it's a way just to, it's kind of entertainment as well, really. But yeah, it's to find a different way in. That's why I tend to do it. I tend to try and start with different instruments or different ideas, or I have a look at what I've been doing and see how it's been. I've been doing the same thing and what I haven't been doing, and try and change it up deliberately.
That works. Changing up deliberately, the notion of flicking things through. Now, can we see your whiteboard? Is that going to be possible, or is it hidden right now?
I can't show it at the moment because I do use it for work as well, and it does have a diagram on it at the moment.
Well, okay, fair enough. For anyone who hasn't,
got a list of subgroups to use for live bouncing on it. It's got a list of patches that I like on the Micro Freak, It's also got themes that I want to explore in music and things that a song has to have. Like there has to be a payoff, it has to have a vibe, it has to have space or a hook. Well, I make notes of things like this, things to consider while I'm writing. If I start to get a little bit stuck, I think, well, how many of these elements are in your song so far? How much of this have you explored? Have you forgotten anything?
Well,
Yeah, there's a list of things on the right-hand side to try. I can't read from here, but there's about, I'd say about 15 ideas that's in short form. It's just a few words. I think one of them was like distorted reverb or something. There was something I was listening to that gave me the idea of putting clean sounds and just distorting the reverb. And since then, I have been adding a little bit of saturation to reverb returns just to bring the harmonics out a little bit in them. And yeah, it's just things that pop into my head. Oh, you haven't done this, try this.
Yeah, I like that. Just the proverbial throwing paint at the wall and seeing how it dries kind of thing. There's a mix of analogies there, but I think that works.
Experimenting with texture, experimenting with rhythm, experimenting with pitch, yeah.
I like that. Frequency Control Center would love to see that list. So maybe one of these days when you've got official work on that list, that'd be a good way of seeing it. I think everyone wants to steal your ideas. I think that's kind of works, having a list of having a whiteboard. I used to have a whiteboard back in Vietnam, but I had to get rid of it. But these days, throwing things in and seeing what sticks, and a sketch pad is always a good way to go. Fyter, we've obviously gone through a lot of how you've been kind of switching things up. I mean, is there anything that you do? This is obviously a new template, for example, is something quite large. It's quite big. It's quite a shift in the way they work. Is there anything more day to day that you do to switch things up?
I don't know so much about day to day. I might do a different style of song. Like something more piano based or something synth based, ambient, something with drums. I mean, switch it up like that. I mean, whatever Ian said, I do the same thing, except for I don't put it on a whiteboard. I use notes on my MacBook. So each project that I'm working on, I'm always taking notes and jogging things down. Even what Shady and I were working on, I think we put together like 20 different types of ideas of mixing and matching certain effects with instruments, and we may have used half of those. But I think when you're inspired with those ideas, like Ian does, mark them down. So when you're not inspired, you can go back and look at them and try things out. The other thing he said too is I like to go explore some of the soft synths and effects that I don't use as often. So you saw in my template today, a lot of it was the OB, the Jupiter, the Juno, those. And I think once I get burned out on these things, I'll probably start going and looking at the 2600 and some of the semi-modular plugins that I have, because I haven't explored those. There's a ton of inspiration that's just hiding in there. But you got to play with it. That's the fun of it. Is you got to play with it to figure it out. And if you don't figure it out right away, try it again later.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
It's
fun though, right?
Yeah, I mean, really, the fun of what we do is just experimenting with things. And I mean, I'm definitely not using the same style of template I was doing 2 or 3 years ago. My process has changed completely since then, and I expect that it'll be completely different in 2 years from now. Although, when you listen to what I probably release, you might not be able to tell the difference.
Yeah,
I mean, but the fun is the execution of it.
Yeah, and having an identifiable sound as well. I mean, you would like to think that it's still you, no matter how much you deliberately change it. But what's led things to change in your template? Is it things that you've learned from outside or picked up from other people? Is it changes in your own setup and what you've got? Is it the desire to do things differently? Is it all of those things to a certain degree? Is there anything I missed? What drives the changes in the way that you approach it?
You're asking me specifically?
Yeah.
The template that I build there, I don't think I've gotten to the point of where I'm going to change it yet. But right now, it's going to be just kind of pulling those certain things out. But what's going to drive the change is boredom in playing with the same ideas, same instruments, and what I have mapped to the macro.
I meant from what you were doing like a couple of years ago to now.
What's changed
immensely. What's led that change? What kind of input has made that happen?
I think understanding the gear better and having different musical ideas.
Trying to do different things with it, I suppose.
And different types of execution too. I mean, a couple of years ago, I was just using the APC and maybe some other controller. Now I got the key step and the beat step. That changes how I want to execute things and how I want things mapped. And I expect that to continuously change.
Yeah.
I think there's an acceptance in that as well. Like, I mean, my workflow has changed quite considerably since, well, firstly, since getting a second. I keep saying a lot this week, but by the way, I have a second launch control, which I think it's my third time.
I don't know why you're stopping at 2. I mean, you might as well get 3 at this point.
Well, mainly it's about desk space at this point and USB in the laptop. But
tape onto your chest.
Oh, that's
just have it right here, right?
Yeah, I think it's just the Ableton Darth Vader. I think, but since that point, it's given me a new love for instrument rack and bussing and stuff like that. And I've seen even in this year, I've seen evolution after evolution after mini evolution after mini evolution come through. And I go back to some of my project. I'm at the stage now where I'm going back over some project files of the stuff I've been composing from back in January and February and March, for example, right? And my workflow has changed so considerably. I'm like, wow, okay, all right. And though, what I'm trying to say in a very roundabout way, I could bring it back down to earth, is that notion of accepting that continuous evolution, accepting that continuous change is the excitement of it. I really enjoy the template that I'm currently using in Ableton. It's like it's for the first time it feels like an extension of myself in a way, you know.
Another reason to attach that controller to your body. I mean, it's who you are.
Is that because it's evolved partly from the live streams, though?
Yeah,
because you're trying to develop a bit of an instrument around you as well, aren't you?
Well, I suppose this whole system here and here is meant to be. I'd like at one point be able to strap it all up in a big flight case and ship it out to that's Cloudskate Amnesty and just kind of go ahead with it, you know. So yes, in that sense it is, but it's developing that, but it's also, again, for example, the instrument rack, for example, and then as you're doing Hydrofighter, macroing in the instrument rack and blending the sounds together and creating those bus effects, and instead of, you know, suddenly that one preset becomes unlimited amount of presets because you can shift it and change it and blend it in all other ways, and having an appreciation for that long-term extrapolation of thought and creativity is something that is meant to be marveled. And I don't know, maybe it's me being facetious. Maybe I'm getting up my own arse here or talking out of my arse here. Probably both, because that's what I tend to do. The notion of
sample that too.
Yeah, sample that.
On a t-shirt. The notion of when we try and create. I mean, when we try and create and we're having an end game and we have going into this, I want to create a lo-fi track, or I want to create an ambient track, or I want to create an Aphex Twin track, you know, that kind of thing. Going in with that notion of just seeing what happens and having no expectation, that's kind of, for me at least, that was a big mental shift. Frequency Control Center says it. He says, recently I got a deep mind. All I seem to be doing at the moment is learning and experimenting, not writing full songs, but I'm loving it. Feels free, not pressured.
That's fun. That's what I want to do a lot of this winter, is just having fun with it. If it doesn't make an album or a release, who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's the boss?
Yeah.
You can do what you like.
Just do what you like. You know,
that's the most liberating thing about it, I find. It's just me. I can do whatever I want, if that means not doing anything. You know, I can do that too. Although it doesn't really, but
even if the stuffed version of yourself tells you otherwise.
Yeah, I'd say, what does he know anyway? He's only got a little bit more between his ears than me.
It's interesting. ASF Stripe, David pops up. He's going to be coming on the show next week. We're going to be talking about we're going to be talking about gear and talk about creativity and creative tools and MIDI. He says he's trying not to change his hardware setup. I changed that way too much. I suppose that's the notion on the other side of it. If you're continuously evolving and changing your sound and changing your workflow as a response, sometimes you can get lost in the weeds, I suppose, is a fair comment to make. You've got to have a home base, I feel, maybe perhaps.
I think so.
Cables, right? I mean, hardware, nobody likes playing with cables, let's be honest. And Eon's a network engineer. He knows more about it than anybody.
More cables. Yeah. Yeah, I must admit, I don't mind when they're little cables you can keep neat, sort of this sort of length is fine.
Yeah.
It's a whole other side of it. It's like in this gig, people ask you, what do you do? It's like, if I'm a sound engineer, they say, oh, what do you do? And they think it's all cool and sexy and like engineering for bands and stuff. No, it's cabling. That's what 95 is. What do you do for them? I wrap cables,
Exactly, yeah. It used to be the same for me. It was I get to finish work. I get to finish recording, and then I get to spend an hour and a half stage coiling like 50, 60 mic cables, putting all the mics away. It's another hour and a half's work.
Let's go.
It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to hear next week what David has to say about that. I'm a little bit curious. I mean, I know you guys are playing more with modular, and moving your stuff around has to be kind of a hassle, right?
Yeah. Although I have not switched that on for 2 months.
Really?
Yeah.
I'll have it.
Just turn it on for 2 minutes after the show. It just makes it better.
It's going to be great when I do, though, because it's all going to be fresh again, and I'll be like a kid in the toy shop. And something will happen. But yeah, I've been going in different ways. And like while you two are trying to find ways of having more control and being able to switch between different sounds easily, because it's all pulled together into a nice, tidy interface, I've been sort of going the other way and using the sampler a bit more and turning things into audio files, and the joy of the fact that you can have an incredibly complex, really evocative sound, and it uses no CPU at all.
Right.
Absolutely none.
Well, it's pretty easy to freeze tracks in Ableton, though.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And
But then that leaves you open to going back. You can unfreeze and change and refreeze and so on. And sometimes just that destructive element of going, it's done. You bounced it. It's gone. This is what you've got now. I find quite liberating. Which is a little bit similar to modular in a way, where it's like, once you pull those cables out, or sometimes you even move one knob a little bit too far one way, it's all gone. So,
I think there's something really interesting about that as well, especially when it comes to sampling. If you sample something and you manipulate it, bouncing it after every iteration, so you're stuck with it in the sense of, again, Bendy was saying about limitation. You've got that limitation. Okay, I might have oversaturated that kick now, but it is what it is. Now I've got to deal with it, and that brings in randomness, that brings in the universe, that brings up everything in that regard that you wanted to do. I wanted to throw one more thing out before we head towards the end of the show. I wanted to get what you guys thought about it. I'll give you a bit of a preamble, because preambles are fun. I went to a psytrance festival over the weekend. And it was awesome. Now, I was on the dance floor listening to psytrance at a very respectable hour in the evening, and I was basically counting along. I was listening. It's progressive psytrance, and it follows a relatively simple formula. It follows about 16 bars. You've got a bit of ear candy at 8, a bit of ear candy at 4, a bit of ear candy at 12, and then it repeats, and you've got to fill at the 15th bar, etc. Build, release, tension, yada yada yada. It got me thinking. I just thought I'm going to experiment after the show today on my live stream. The notion of creating by numbers. Now, painting by numbers we thought of as something that is inherently negative, right? Do you mind? I'm not doing a show. Sorry, Steve's wanting dinner. The cat Steve, not Hydrophite Steve.
I want dinner too, though. Feed me.
I'll get there. Yeah, so I was thinking painting by numbers. Now, inherently, as musicians, as creatives, as artists, the idea of filling in a formula is a bit icky, right? Unless you're making lo-fi, right? I'm just digging on lo-fi people. But the notion of identifying a formula within an established piece of work and then painting by those numbers to see what comes out. For me, I've never done that. So for me, that's a different workflow. But I'm math rock alert. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, David. Math rock alert. Is that something that you guys ever tried? Is it something that interests you at all or anything like that at all?
Yeah.
For me, it interests me ever since I've heard about Killing Joke and all the numerology and stuff that they tried to introduce to their music. Although they never go into a lot of detail about how they go about it, but I mean they use the numbers in intervals that they're using in chords and stuff as well. And they come up with some pretty eerie sounding stuff that's got a lot of mood. I like the idea of it. I've not really experimented with it much, but I guess I'd need to like the result of it as well.
Yeah,
I do like the idea.
I like I think about it more in a pattern type of way, like Steve Reich stuff. His whole thing is about having things out of, I mean, he started with tape loops of out of phase with each other, and he started writing around that idea of counterpoint. And Terry Riley did some of that stuff too, and I think they're very interesting compositions. And I like that idea, and I've played around with it. I don't think I've really put anything out on a release too much like that, and I don't know if I ever will. But I think the idea, like FCC was saying earlier about, going into experimenting and just having fun with things. I do that all the time, and play with those patterns. And I actually, a couple months ago, thought about actually doing a full release like that, or maybe an EP of having patterns out of phase with each other. And especially when you think about when you're turning knobs at the same time, you're going to get some pretty cool things. I mean, I think when you're doing things that are out of phase with each other, unless you really want it to be ugly, you're going to have to keep it in key. But I mean, you don't have to. If you want it to be ugly, it's ugly, sexy sometimes.
Make sure you do sexy ugly though. Don't do ugly.
I like the idea of, and I think I've done some of that with randomized drum things. A couple years ago, I was doing some of this where I would have multiple channels in Ableton feeding into one drum thing to get random things, and I would do like 4.5 bars or 5 bars, 6 bars, and you have them all playing at the same time, so it hits on an instrument oddly. So I have done it. I'd like to do it some more. I'd like to structure it really cool, but we'll have to see. Curtis, you said you haven't really played much with that idea?
No, well, I'm similar to FCC on this. He says he never goes music by numbers. He always just goes with the vibe and the flow, whether it's musically right or wrong. And historically, I've been a bit more down that way. What I like to do is kind of get everything ready, go out, meditate, journal, and then just hit record and see what happens. I don't really think about it. And but that's why, again, in the name of switching up workflows and the name of kind of, I suppose, also learning about different genres, learning about different things and trying different things, the notion of just going by the numbers. Because again, I've been listening to psytrance for years, and this is purely because I went to the
psytrance? What is that specifically?
Eon Lake?
It's like a psychedelic dance music. Started a long time ago in Goa in the 90s. It's kind of like techno, but a little bit faster, a bit more layered and wonky.
So
is it
pulsing?
Yeah, it's a rhythmic four to the floor.
Well, really, I mean, when you think about some
note bass going on, and it's become quite formulaic and quite sort of rigid, whereas back in the day it was a bit more freeform and had a lot more layers and things going on.
But when you think about the pulsing music, I mean, we think like 4 on the floor because our mind is set on a 4/4 time signature. But when you're listening to that stuff, it's really a 1/1 time signature. It's just a pulsing thing. And so you're not restricted by any sort of phrasing with that. So you can evolve it however you want. And I think that's the cool thing about pulsing music.
Yeah, I played with it a little bit on the new album. I did one in 7 that feels like it's in 4.
Just double it. Just double it and it makes it even. That's what a drummer told me once.
Well, even that, I mean, that's what similar to what ASF Stripe's saying here. 6 and 10 step sequences mixed with loops can be fun. Polyrhythms, again, Eon Lake, you're a big fan of polyrhythms in that regard.
Yeah, the new EP's a lot of polyrhythms and exploring patterns of different lengths sitting on top of each other. Yeah, that's kind of like the theme for the whole thing. But yeah, I love that stuff. I'm gonna have to find something else to love one day because it's done it a bit too much maybe soon.
Well, I think it's one of those where you always kind of you run and coming back to, like some of the patches on here that I haven't used for years since like Vietnam. I'm slowly coming back to now, and even they get tweaked and they get run around a little bit. They're still the patches that I made, and they're still kind of intrinsically Curtis in that regard, but they're a little bit different. And again, that's evolution in its own right. I mean, Bendu brings up a very interesting point here. I've done the track analysis / copy, the form thing a couple of times, and it really demystified the arranging or arrangement for me. Lessons to be learned from your favorite tracks. I suppose Sunwarper might catch me on the replay if he's listening, if he's watching back on YouTube, or if anyone's back on Spotify, which goes out on Saturdays. The idea of, I suppose you could start call that the beginnings for a reference track, which historically I've been very against.
But this is arrangement reference, isn't it? I think that's what Ben means, of like looking at the structure of a song and then using exactly the same structure yourself, but with completely different musical content. I've done that before, and it's a good way to sometimes finish a song when you're not quite sure about an arrangement. Go, right, well, I'll decide on the arrangement irrespective of the music, and then the music has to fit. I've done that before, and it actually worked, because once I dispensed this struggling with what the arrangement should be, and I knew what it should be, I could just write the bloody song. It's kind of removed the block for me. But yeah, it's an interesting to do anyway. Just sort of drag a track into your DAW, and then you can sort of chop it up and label the sections and mute all of that and do a song yourself exactly the same.
Are we remixing ourselves here? Is that what's happening?
Sorry?
Are we remixing ourselves here?
Well, it could be you. Yeah, it could be someone else's track. You're not actually going to use the audio, so it's just looking at the the structure.
Oh, I get where you're going with this. Yeah.
So I've got to do a 16-bar intro followed by 32-bar verse and then 8-bar pre-chorus. Do you know what I mean? Just having that and saying, right, that's what you're going to do.
You have to follow standard Beatles song structures, Ian.
It's the only way a song will ever be made in the 22nd century.
Yeah, well, again, I was reading today that the music is evolving now because of streaming, and that you have to have your chorus hit in the first minute, otherwise, because people would just skip otherwise, and all the rest of it. And I was just reading that, thinking, well, okay, I see why people are doing that, because they want to get on playlists, but at the same time, it's going to generate a lot of music that feels kind of samey.
Yep.
And that creates a market for another type of music that isn't samey. Thank God.
That's the weirdest thing I've heard in a long time. The chorus has to be in almost right away.
Get your hook in there early so that people can hear. So they used an example of a song that had a 7-minute intro. I forget what it was, but it's a classic Motown. I think it was Papa Was a Rolling Stone or something like that. The original cut of that being, I don't know, 13 minutes or something. Massive intro, no vocals. I mean, you just don't get that now because it won't hit the playlists.
But it's interesting that some of the younger generations are still buying 70s prog rock stuff. I mean, like Dark Side of the Moon, it's still a super relevant album today.
Well, it's like rules and throwing the rules away. Rules are cool to a certain extent, and there'll always be a backlash, I think, against that. I think it's in our natures, really, isn't it?
I think so. Sorry, I was a bit distracted by Steve, who's currently sniffing at my ashtray. I'll leave Hydra
Oh,
Fighter.
It's not a euphemism. Never heard it called that before.
Yeah, I get that. Bendu popped up in reference to what you were talking about psytrance. Ian, like, if you're deconstructing the psytrance form while dancing, how is that different from a reference track? I think it's very fair. I think we call that multitasking, purging the soul, and also becoming a better musician. I think that's killing two birds with one stone. I think. That's the best way of looking at it.
My favourite moments came when I couldn't analyze what I was listening to anymore. I just sat thinking, how do they make a sound like that? How do you make a sound like that?
Well,
I don't know.
You have to stop dancing.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
That's the thing about psytrance. Once you start, it's very difficult to stop. I'll send you some psytrance. I mean, to be fair, I think Ian Lake's probably got a better idea of what psytrance is. I come from the modern day of psytrance, which is again very formulaic. Hence why I'm trying this little exploration of paint by numbers. I think it might ruin the genre for me. We'll have to see. So yeah. Bendu also pipes up and says, Steve, I don't know if that's for you, Hydra Fighter, or if that is indeed for
it's a cat. I mean, it's a cat. I'm not putting my back end on screen, Curtis. And if I did, I would expect Bendu to call me out on it.
I think we're more than one message if you do that.
But yes, is there anything else that we've missed, gents, before we move towards the end of the show today?
Probably, but in the interests of not doing a 5-hour stream, we're not Twitch gamers, are we? So
that's fair.
Shut me up while you can, I think.
If we will then, if there's anything else that we've missed, or is there anyone listening back on YouTube or in fact on Spotify or Apple Music, let us know in the Discord. The link is in the description. If you wanted to add to the conversation in the Discord, it'd be really cool to see what you guys are at, how you're changing up your workflow, how you are trying your best to evolve as a producer. Because we've had some ideas, but there's loads more because there's only 3 of us today. So yeah, thank you ever so much for joining us. Hydra Fighter, do you think the rest of your week until we next hear, will that be as productive as this? Do you feel?
I doubtful. I don't think so, but we'll see.
Okay, fair enough.
Kind of take. I feel like I overloaded myself this past week, so I might just kind of shut down for a few days and start fresh next week.
That's great.
Is that something you do regularly? Sort of just try and pace yourself a bit and not burn out too much.
I don't try to. I think it just happens. I mean, sometimes I just want to listen to music and have a couple of beers, and that's good enough for me. And I think that's productive in its own right.
Yeah. Sometimes you need input before you can produce output.
Mm-hmm. You need to live a life before you can write about it. To paraphrase.
T-shirts. T-shirts are coming.
Oh, yeah. How about you, Ian Lake? What's in store for you this week?
Finishing stuff up, basically. Giving myself a kick up the backside and go get finished, get done, move on to the next thing. But I will be putting some whiteboard ideas into the Discord just to give an idea of the kind of things I'm doing, because I don't know. I mean, I like the idea of a community-driven whiteboard, where everybody comes up with ideas. So all the weird things that pop into your head about, what about if you did this? Share them all, and we can all stick them on a whiteboard. So one thing's for sure, I think if you took the same idea and got 10 people to write different songs using that idea, I mean, they wouldn't sound the same anyway. It doesn't matter. It's the same idea. You would get 10 very different things as a result. So there's no reason not to share.
Sounds like something that Audionaut should initiate.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have a contest. Or just here, challenge you to do this type of idea, see what you come up with, share it with the community. And
or a bucket, say pick X number of ideas from the following, let it constrain you and write something and then share it.
Yeah,
I like that. Community white again to follow off that one.
Andrew just said it should be a Discord channel. He's right.
There we go.
He's right.
Yep.
The people have spoken. I'll have a look into that. I like the idea of a contest, a bucket, and having a whiteboard idea. See if, throwing it. What make a track like this, make a vignette like this, sparking creativity. I think it's a fantastic shout. It's a fantastic shout.
Yeah. Shout out to Brian Eno though, because I've totally ripped the idea off his, oblique strategies cards. But yeah.
Brian Eno, he's so 1970s, man.
Yeah. Let's bring that shit up to date.
With still good ideas. I mean,
we go through. And a frequency control synthesis, we can add boards of Funkadelica to the list. I think I should.
Wow.
Boards of Funkadelica. I like it. We'll continue this discussion on the Discord channel and try and create a community-driven event. I think it's a great idea. So thank you ever so much for that input. Hydrofighter, thank you ever so much for coming and sharing with us your wealth of knowledge and ideas.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the next couple of episodes where we can get some additional knowledge from some other guys.
Yeah, we love picking people's brains.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, very much so. We've got ASF Stripe will be joining us next week, where we'll be discussing all things about creativity tools, and he wants to talk a little bit about MIDI, which I inquired into earlier but didn't have time to look at, but it's going to be interesting. So we'll see you guys next week, same time, same place, unless anything goes awry. I'm trying to look for the thing that goes for the video. Again, thank you ever so much. Been wonderful to speak to everyone. We'll see you next week. Ciao for now. Bye-bye.